he says, yeah, you know the common law like the back of your hand. I said, because it's simple. I said, so simple. I said, there's only a couple of steps. There's only like 6, 7 steps, and you're done. I said, this isn't rocket science. I said, this is how your grandpappy lived. I said, this is how my dad and my grandfather lived. They didn't read or write English. They could move through court in 20 minutes. They didn't know anything about a code. There wasn't codes around back then for these people. How did the country exist before the codes started coming out in 1938? How did they exist? I said, because law was simple. Did you do something wrong? The man had to appear in court and testify against you. The plaintiff must appear. It's an ancient common law thing that's been around for thousands and thousands of years. Because if you point a finger and you said he did me wrong, and you bear false witness against thy neighbor, you died. You know, it was a death sentence. So that's why nobody was crazy enough to file false claims or frivolous claims. Nobody was crazy enough to do that, because whatever punishment you wanted for the defendant got to do it to you if you lost. So bringing to somebody in court was a really dangerous thing to do for thousands of years. I said, so common law is incredibly simple. I said, so that's how you beat the government all the time, because the government needs to have the plaintiff appear. Now, the prosecutor is appearing for the plaintiff, but the guy who's making it's a plaintiff. Again, it's a complaint, not a claim. See, so like I said, I don't even bother answering. When somebody's complaining, it's like, say, like a wife complaining or a husband complaining. You just say, you know what, you're complaining again. You know what, I'm not even going to answer that. I'm not dealing with it. It's a complaint. You got a claim, state your claim. You know, your claim is 2 sentences long. Prove it. Can you prove it? Yeah, okay. Then I did it or I didn't do it. You're like, okay, I got pictures of you being with this woman next door. You know, the neighbor saw you do it. She said it. Okay, you got a claim? Yeah, okay. Well, okay, you got me busted. That's a claim. A complaint is like, you're looking at her again. Yeah, you must be messing around with her, aren't you? It's like, oh, here we go again. Another complaint. So you guys got to learn the difference between complaints and claims. That's a huge thing. Because claims are done in one pages. Complaints go on forever. It's just like I said, it's exactly what a complaint or plaintiff means. It's a French word for like a nagging old hag. That's what a plaintiff is. You know, you don't call somebody a plaintiff in France, man. He'll smack you. You know, it's like, I'm not a plaintiff. I'm not nagging. You know, that's what it means, somebody who's nagging. You know, it's like, I'm not a plaintiff. And that's what I told the district court. I said, stop calling me a plaintiff. I'm not nagging. I'm making a claim. Is anybody claiming that my claim is not true? I said, you know, that's all I want to hear, yes or no. I'm not making a complaint. No, I'm not complaining. I'm not a plaintiff. So the whole trick is, like I said, just say you're making a claim. I'm a man and I have rights and I'm protected and secured by the United States Constitution. There you go. And then now I'm going to make the people hold up their oaths of office to the Constitution. Did they or did they not, under Article 6, 2, and 3, swear to uphold the Constitution as the law of the land? That's the next step. After I demand that they send my orders back signed, sealed, and delivered, which they're not going to do, I said to the marshals, then I'm going to have to hold them to their oaths of office. And then when they don't uphold their oaths of office, then I'm going to go after their bond. I said, it's going to be that simple. And I showed them the book. I opened up the book and I said, look, under Section 61, public employees, public officials, and bonds. And he was like, holy cow, man, you got this thing all covered. I said, yes. I said, I'm not stupid. I said, I'm coming to the Marshal Service. And I said, I'm going to show them the bonds under Section 61. It says an official bond is an instrument under seal by which a public officer undertakes to pay a sum of money if he does not faithfully discharge his office, or by which a surety undertakes that if the officer does not do so, the surety will be liable in a penal sum. It says, well, more generally, an official bond is the bond of a public officer, and it has to be held that every bond executed by an officer in obedience to the law, in which the surety undertakes that he shall discharge a public duty imposed upon him by law, is called an official bond. I said, so that's what I'm going to do. I said, I want to ask for their official bonds, if they're bonded. And it just says the filling of an official bond is generally regarded as a necessary prerequisite to fill the title of an office. It is a condition precedent to the right of a person elected or appointed to be inducted into office. And without such a bond, one is not entitled to the office and may not legally hold or discharge any of the functions of that office. So I said, there you go. I'm going to demand that they put up their bond. If they don't have a bond, they can't officially or legally put up, discharge their functions of that office. I said, they're officers of the court. So I
love that.
Right. I scanned it. I could send you that little one-page thing. I pulled it right out of their book. I showed them the book.
Please do.
I threw the book on the table. I said, because all the free men in Montana people say public performance bonds, hazard bonds. No, there's only 3 types of bonds. There's official bonds, fidelity bonds, and surety bonds. That's it.
I like the free men of Montana. Stop talking about them.
I love it too. That's what I told the marshals. I said, I'm guilty of sin of that Fremont and Montana stuff. I said, believe me. I said, I thought these guys were great. I said, my sister had one of the Swites' brothers' houses up here on a mountain in Virginia. I said, we had a free man in Montana lady living in a cottage in the back of our house. She was a lovely lady. I said, I love that stuff. I said, but I see where they went wrong. They started doing all these crazy checks and site drafts and going after the IRS. I said, I don't have nothing to do with money. I said, I got a wonderful place up here. I don't need nobody's money. I said, that's where they went wrong, is they started going after it for the money instead of doing it for the principle. I said, I'm doing it for the principle. I said, they did it for the money. I said, if I get some money out of this, well, wonderful. If I don't, big deal. I said, I'm certainly not going to write crazy checks like these guys did and do site drafts and use birth certificates to try to monetize my accounts. And, no, I'm not going to do that crazy stuff. They were using Department of Agriculture's rounding numbers to buy all kinds of stuff. I said, that was insane what they were doing. You know, but God bless them. If that's what they thought was the right thing to do, to get back at, you know, the government for doing what they were doing to them, if they wanted revenge, that's fine. I don't want revenge. I was going to sue them for $1, but the Department of Justice told me not to. He said, nobody's going to take you. They're going to pay you $1, and it's going to be done. He says, then where are you going to be? I said, oh, yeah, I guess so.
Yeah, but then you have your win on the record.
Yeah,
that's
and then
the point.
Right, then you could go afterwards later on. But like I said, I like what he just said. He says, make it a whopper. He says, that'll get everybody's attention. Oh, that's what the Marshal Service said, too. He says, oh, you got everybody's attention, all right. That's exactly what he said. Because I went down to the Marshal Service in November, and at first I went to the district court local down here in Roanoke, and I asked them, can you read my lawsuit? I said, it's simple. Can you just read it? And they were like, no. So then I went to the Marshal Service, and I said to the Marshal Service, I want you to carry out a couple of writs for me. I got to send them down to Alabama. Does this stuff make any sense to you? So they read them real quick, and they're like, nah, we don't do stuff like this. And they just basically blew me off. So when they got a call to come back down there 2 months later, it's like, well, you guys kind of blew me off 2 months ago. He's like, yeah, well, now you definitely got our attention. He says, can you please come down here again? I said, oh, now you want to talk to me. He says, oh, yeah. He said, you got our attention now with that paperwork. He said, somebody in the courthouse read that paperwork, and they know what you're doing. They want us to talk to you and find out just who you are and, like, what's your goals. What are you trying to do with this? I said, yeah, because with this paperwork, honestly, I said, I can wind up owning the state of Alabama, couldn't I? He said, we need to talk to you now. Because there needs to be a man who's going to have to come forth on the other side and say they did not do me wrong. Good luck with that. And I can claim anything. I can claim the whole entire state. What are they going to do? How are they going to say that's outrageous? Okay, who's saying it's outrageous? Somebody's going to have to come forth and say that it's outrageous. And then I'm going to have to get it before a jury. And then the jury's going to tell me I'm outrageous. The jury's going to say, look, here's $5. You know, have a nice day, sir. Trying to claim the whole state? Yeah, you're crazy. But $5 worth, here you go. You're worth $5 or $1 million. Whoever knows what the jury decides. But that's the whole trick. You know, you've got to keep it on the common law side. And they realizing I'm fighting like, you know, an alley cat to try to keep it on the common law side. And they want me to bring it over to the civil rights side. And I don't have civil rights. That's what I told them. I said, civil rights are only for certain protected individuals in society, and I'm not it. It's not a prophylactic remedy for all society's ills. I said, that's Scalia, U.S. versus Georgia in 2006. And they're like, holy cow. I said, you could do this stuff right off the top of your head. I said, oh, absolutely. And so when you're suing somebody for millions of dollars, you better believe you better know this stuff off the top of your head. Because you got to get before the jury, and you better be quick. Mm-hmm. That's why I say to everybody, just make it these one-page lawsuits. That way you can get in front of a jury and just keep it quick. Because when you make a claim, you can't modify it by one word. And you get challenged by the man in the black robe or in front of a jury, you have to just keep saying that one sentence like a broken record. Because that's what it is. You pressed upon the record your word. And you can't modify it by one word. You can't start changing your claim. Either you did, you know, like I said, discover the South Pole, or you didn't. If they say, well, come on, maybe you're off by 1 millimeter. It's like, no, because if you say you're off by 1 millimeter, Well, then you didn't discover the South Pole. They'll say, oh, come on, be reasonable about this. Come on, reasonable, come on. It was 100 degrees below zero. It was snowstorms. You were sick. You were dying. You were starving. Come on, maybe you were off by 1 millimeter. Maybe your compass froze. Come on, maybe, come on. Just say maybe. Maybe I was off by 1 millimeter. As soon as you just change your word by 1 little millimeter, your whole claim falls through and you don't get a penny. And your case gets kicked out of court. So that's the whole trick, too. Don't fall for this lawyer nonsense when they try to say be reasonable. Don't be reasonable. You make your claim. Your word is your bond. You don't ever alter your claim. You don't change the word. That's why I tell everybody, do it in 1 sentence or less. That way you have too much to say in court. You can't possibly make a mistake. You write 800 pages. Of course you're not going to be able to remember it and say it under oath of affirmation in open court.
Nobody's going to read it either.
Right, but you have to make your claim under oath of affirmation in open court. You have to.
I'm saying an 800-page document, nobody's going to read it.
Right, because if you don't, that's what Richard Cornforth tells you. If you don't make your claim in open court under oath of affirmation, it could be considered a void judgment. Somebody could come back 100 years from now and say, but Mr. Lentz or Miss Angela, you did not do it in open court under oath of affirmation. So that makes it a void judgment. You have to do it in open court under oath of affirmation. So make it your claim 1 sentence. Make it super simple, like I said, like I do. I just say it's so simple. Forgery. The DHR uttered a forged instrument which interfered with my rights. I can remember that. See Exhibit C. It's like, there you go. And the marshals looked at Exhibit C, and they go, this is the contract? I was like, yeah. He's like, this has to do with a grandma and uncle taking in a granddaughter and to live in an apartment. What does this have to do with a newborn Downs baby boy in a hospital and what? I said, absolutely. I said, how lazy could these people be? It's a standard form, a standard contract form. I said, you think they could have at least wrote my name, my wife's name on a blank form, my baby's name on a blank form, made our signatures on a blank form, and signed and sealed and stamped it by the clerk of the court. You'd think they would have taken 5 minutes out to at least make a fake contract. No. They just grabbed somebody else's contract and threw it in a case file. That's how lazy these people are. They just think that you can't ever get it heard before a court. That's how arrogant they are. Why should we even try to make a foolish contract against you? What court are you going to bring us into? Nobody cares, Mr. Lentz. Nobody's going to care. What are you going to do, sue us in federal court? We're federal agents. What are you going to do? Nobody's going to listen to you. So I'm like, holy cow, these people are right. So like I said, the marshals, like I said, I talked to them for like 2 hours, and they said, yeah, you're right. You're really up against the wall on this one, ain't you? So you better believe it. I said, so you got to do it methodically. You got to do it 1 step at a time. I said, now you got to hold them to their oaths of office. I said, and I'll send that bond thing to you. I scanned it.
Okay.
You'll love it. It's simple. But,
I sent you a couple of emails already with reminders.
Okay, that's fine.
But send that one because I didn't.
Oh, that's not a problem.
There were several documents. I don't remember them all now.
Oh yeah, like I said, I made it really simple. Like I sent you guys that stuff before I filed the lawsuit. So the lawsuit I actually sent was really simple. I sent you, I filed a lawsuit around December 1st. And that stuff that you guys got, I think it was November 18th, 19th, 20th. So it was you always tighten everything up, the last week or two before you get ready to send it to the court. So, yeah, like I said, it's a lot simpler and tighter.